Welcome in. It is Big Ten Today. We are presented by Gatorade on this Monday, the Monday Schmooze. Great to have you with us. Dave Revson, Nicole Auerbach, Howard Griffith. 1 day away from the beginning of the college football playoff ranking season. We are 2 days away from the beginning of November. I admittedly don't have the world's greatest memory, but I can't remember more chaos. I can't remember more uncertainty heading into a playoff ranking season, heading into a November. I would just say I do not look at any of the teams in the country and say that I definitively believe that any of them will be in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think, too, like the way that the AP polls ranked may look very different than the CFP rankings. That's not always the case either. It does feel very much up in the air, and we could actually learn something from the first rankings this year.
It's fun, though. I think the college football fan wanted this and needs this, and partly because of the portal. They've been able to get quarterbacks in other places, and teams have really been able to really upgrade their rosters.
And if there was a year to have incredible uncertainty and to have, again, we've been talking about 12, 13 teams that you could legitimately say still have a shot to make it in the playoff. Why not do it in the last year of the 4-team playoff, right? It won't be. I think we're all excited. I know I'm excited about a 12-team playoff for a variety of reasons, but you won't have that same ambiguity next year that you've got right now in terms of who may or may not make it in. So we're going to talk about that later in the show, but our big story is always looking back on the results from the week that was. Two of the Big Ten's 3 top 10 teams were in action on Saturday. They were both winners. Ohio State going on the road to top Wisconsin. Penn State winning a closer than expected battle with Indiana. Northwestern, the most surprising win of the weekend. They are 4-4 after topping Maryland. Nebraska and Minnesota's wins give us a 4-way tie atop the Big Ten West. We'll get into that in a moment. Let's start with what was the biggest game, and that actually incorporates the Big Ten West a little bit with Wisconsin. But Ohio State and Wisconsin, Buckeyes went into Camp Randall. This was a one-score game in the fourth quarter, and Wisconsin, for all the injury issues they have, played Ohio State well. But you look at this game, TreVeyon Henderson comes back and was really good, and this defense continues to shine, and then Marvin is Marvin.
That's basically the summation of what this is. But I want to talk about TreVeyon Henderson because I think that was the biggest takeaway that I had was that when he is healthy, he is such a difference maker. This offense looks entirely different. I think he makes up for whatever questions you've got about the offensive line. He's got speed that some of the other players, other running backs, they've plugged in a lot of guys, and a lot of guys have done a lot of good things, but the speed to get to the perimeter, to get around defenders, to get through gaps that maybe anyone else can't get through. TreVeyon Henderson is a really special player, and it really goes 2 seasons back now that this is what they can be when he's healthy, and the rest of the questions we have about them are much more pressing when he is not healthy.
It was really fascinating to watch him really run the football because they looked like a different team.
Yeah.
They just look like a different team when he's out there giving you that explosion from the tailback position. And it helps the passing game. The passing game still had some issues at times, but when he's healthy, it looks like they can count on being able to run the ball with a lot of consistency.
And they can run it when they need to run it, but they can also break off the big plays. Like you have all of that capability. We talk about Marvin Harrison, and everyone knows the ball is going to go to Marvin Harrison, but that makes it easier. When you're also running the ball, that opens up things in the pass game because you have to defend that.
They came into the weekend 10th in the Big Ten in rushing, and I think we're at a point now where, and we'll talk about their defense in a second, but they're leading with defense. I mean, this is not a team that is as explosive as they've been in the past. But it was looking for a while there like the run game, liability may be a strong word, but weakness, slight weakness, I think that would be a fair assessment of where it was. It's different with him in there. And as you said, this is no disrespect to some of the other guys who have filled in really well. But he's just at a different level, and he really wasn't that healthy at all last year, as we know. And so I think people almost forget how good he was when he's running for 1,200 yards. I mean, this is a big-time back, and we were talking about as one of the most explosive backs in the country. And the thing he did this time was he waited until he was ready to go, right? He didn't come back at 80% or whatever.
Because that hasn't worked for him.
It hasn't, right? And so now back at 100%, I mean, he makes a huge difference on this team. Let's talk about the defense, because the defense, to me, is the difference. I mean, this is a team that still hasn't given up a play longer than 40 yards all season. They have taken what was the biggest concern heading into the year and turned it arguably into their biggest strength.
Yeah, and they've done this now in a couple of hostile environments. Like that defense traveled. It kept them in the game, put them in a really good position against Notre Dame, right? We all know about that final drive and that final touchdown. But against Wisconsin, like this was a close game. It was tight. It was one possession. I thought Braden Locke did a lot of good things, actually, especially coming out of the half, even without Braylon Allen. And they needed that defense to step up. It got key stops. Tommy Eichenberg on that one third down play that saved the touchdown. That was remarkable.
Because that's not a small man that he stood up in the hole.
And put out of the game.
Yeah,
that
was quite a hit.
Yeah.
Watching him play this year has really been good. And I think he's really been the key to that defense. And Coach Knowles has talked about that, being able to have him on the field because he can get them into the right plays if there was a miss somewhere, and really does a great job of controlling the defense. And they play, to me, this defensive line continues to get better week in and week out, the way they're playing. And this is a team that's gained confidence. We've talked about what has it been? Giving up big plays all the time. They're not doing it. And I don't think that if you don't have explosive wide receivers on the other side of the ball, you're going to have a tough time versus this defense, because these guys can run, and they've played a lot of guys in that secondary, and I think that's really boding well and setting them up for the end of the season.
Yeah, it's a really good point about the receivers, too, because that was a weakness for Notre Dame, right? And if you don't have that, it's really hard to get yards against this defense. But I think it's an incredible credit to this team to take a weakness, to take something that was costing them games, that was putting them in positions where they couldn't put away games, and to be able to rely on this as we continue. We saw Kyle McCord struggle early in this game. Like, it allows them some wiggle room to figure other things out.
Yeah, Kyle McCord made some bad decisions through interceptions for the first time since week one. Gave one away in the end zone that was a really ill-advised pass. So it wasn't as if Ohio State played a perfect game otherwise. Again, Henderson made a huge difference in the run game, but the defense was really good. I do think we should talk about Wisconsin before we turn the page here. Wisconsin is really shorthanded. I mean, you're talking about, first of all, you lost your quarterback, and then Braylon Allen, who we've been talking about, is the centerpiece of the offense, Howard. He goes out with an injury that didn't look great. I mean, hobbling off the field. It'll be interesting to see what his availability is here going forward. And yet, you said a little while ago, Nicole, this game was very much in doubt in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, I think you look at what Luke Fickell has done there, and listen, we've talked about it all year long, that what kind of offense they're running is not what they're going to run in the next year or so. The defense is the same way because of just the way the roster is at this particular moment. But they have adapted their system to the players that are on this roster, and they're playing. They're playing really well at times. Guys are stepping up and making plays, but they have to be able to get that consistency once again at the running back position. And now with Allen out, you kind of wonder which way they go.
All the three players, we spent the entire preseason talking about hyping up Ches Malusi, Braylon Allen, and Tanner Mordecai, all down, and yet they still continue to fight. I thought that was really impressive. We talked about it the week prior in that fourth quarter comeback to win that game. But they're clearly a tough team. They're a tough out as they're figuring these things out, as next man up. But I also thought Braden Locke did some things that were nice too. So I think, you have people stepping up, but getting that week of preparation, knowing that your role is going to be increased, I think is going to be big for them down the stretch. And they are in the West race.
They are.
Yeah, who isn't? I mean, I suppose there are two teams.
Right. We're not in the race.
Maybe we are. Maybe we are.
And also, I mean, to your point on Locke, Chima Adike went out with an injury too. Yeah. So you lose your best wide receiver, you lose your running back, you don't have your quarterback against what we all think is a team that may, I mean, we'll talk about it later, they may end up being number one in the first college football playoff ranking. There's certainly an argument to be made just in terms of the strength of their resume and a couple of those wins they have. And yet Wisconsin played them toe-to-toe. Wisconsin is part of that four-way tie for first in the Big Ten West. They go to Indiana this week, and then all West games down the stretch from there. So we'll see how all that plays out. What do we make of Penn State? A single-digit win at home against an Indiana team that has not won a game in the conference, Howard. They gave up two huge gash plays, which we would not have expected. And aside from one play that won the game, they had the same issues with the lack of explosion on offense.
Yeah, it's I think we're talking about Penn State, but this Indiana team really gave them all that they could handle, and you could make the argument had they come up with a couple more plays, they could have won this game. But Penn State, it's really, I'm just not sure what's going on with them right now. And you talk about not letting one victory, one loss affect the rest of that next game, and it kind of seems like they were kind of sleepwalking to that point. And they really got themselves into a game where they could have had a chance of losing that as well as they play. And they're not getting the explosion offensively. We've talked about that ad nauseum, but I just don't, I can't explain why. And it's when you watch them on tape, I don't know why.
I mean, the weirdest part is, like, we saw it with these players last year, especially the running back. So that part we just continue to be confused by. But needing it and needing to win the game on an explosive play is why we have harped on it.
Yep.
It's because they weren't doing this. They weren't getting those reps for Drew Aller early in the season. Even against a UMass, they weren't really attempting those balls, and they're going to need it. And you shouldn't have needed it to get a win over Indiana. But the Hoosiers did play incredibly well. I continue to be concerned about, I don't know if it's the way the offense is built or it's the play calling or whatever it is, because you're going to be playing Michigan in just a couple of weeks. You're going to need the offense to do more than what it did against Indiana.
Yeah, and you're going to have to get that. It's just not going to be about special teams. They've got to win that side of it, which they've last couple of weeks have been really good in that area. But they've got to figure something out offensively, because right now it just seems to be a struggle.
And impossible to disagree with that. I think where it becomes even more concerning is you felt like the defense you could rely on, right?
Those big plays were
number one in the nation in total
surprising.
I would say this from the defensive standpoint. The big play, that was clearly communication between the corner and the safety. To me, it wasn't schematics. But they still turned somebody loose, and that's something that's not a characteristic of.
You're talking about the second one, not the 90-yarder. You're talking about the 69-yarder.
So I think
because corner blitz there.
Corner blitz, safety didn't go over the top. So whether the safety knew he was blitzing, the corner wasn't supposed to blitz, who knows? They give up the big play. But I think the challenge is when you rely upon your defense all the time, like they have done, and they've been playing so well, that there's always going to be a moment in time, whether it's an entire game or just a quarter or just a couple of plays, where the defense is going to break down. I mean, you see it all the time. So you need to be able to have that explosion or that offensive firepower that's going to get them out of trouble sometimes, because it's going to happen.
Or put pressure on the other defense, right? Because those types of explosive plays can lead to other things. So, yeah, I don't feel great coming out of that game if I'm a Penn State fan.
Yeah. Longest run, 12 yards against
that's the problem.
Team that came in and is still actually last in the Big Ten in rushing defense. I do, and you said some positive things about Indiana. I think it's fair to heap a little praise on the Hoosiers here, because it just hasn't gone as they would have wanted it to go. I think it was a year that began with a lot of promise. They played Ohio State really well in that first game. And it just feels like it hasn't come together here, but still clearly playing hard. And I think there were some reasons for real optimism here.
Oh, for sure. I mean, they could have won this game.
Yeah.
And that would have been huge for Tom Allen and for everything and where this program is right now. But I do think you've got to take some positive. We're talking about how well they played Ohio State and how well they played Penn State. I mean, these are the teams at the top of the league. Yep. And so that is something that is encouraging. They've tried different quarterbacks. They've tried different things offensively. But the fight is there. I mean, they clearly have not given up on the season, and they're rising to the level of their competition in these tougher games.
Yeah, if they can get some more stuff going offensively, that's obviously a big help, because defensively they've got their guys back there healthy. I like where they've been really all year on the defensive side of the ball.
They've got great talent.
Yeah.
Individual talents.
They've gone into the portal and got the guys that they needed to really help them. The challenge has been on the other side of the ball.
There's some winnable games here down the stretch, and Tom Allen would like to get one or two of those at a
maybe all
minimum. All four would certainly be nice. They're still at least mathematically in the bowl hunt with 2 wins, 6 losses on the year. Our biggest stat is brought to you by Gatorade. Northwestern is 4-4, which is pretty remarkable considering the offseason chaos. The 4 wins for interim coach David Braun ties him for the most for a first-year NU coach in the last century. It's a list that includes The two winningest coaches in school history, Pappy Waldorf and Braun's predecessor, Pat Fitzgerald, as well as Ara Parseghian. Got the Cats #1 in the nation during his tenure in Evanston. So a pretty good list. And again, he could be #1 if he wins any of these last 4 games. This is a pretty remarkable story here, Howard, particularly when you consider, again, it was crazy in the offseason, but let's just be honest, they weren't very good these last 2 years. They came into the year with the nation's longest losing streak. The 4 wins in the 8 games that he has coached equals the number of wins in the last 24 games entering the season. It's pretty impressive.
I've really been impressed with him. And this is, when we had a chance to see him in the summer, right, I was very concerned.
Yes, you articulated that.
Very concerned, just by the way things were going. But things were fresh. But I think what Coach Braun has done, what these players have done, is really remarkable thinking about what they've faced, right? And they've gone out and they've competed. This is another one of those teams that, no matter what, they're playing really hard. And players are coming up with plays. I said early in the game on Saturday that they were going to need to throw the ball to win, but I didn't know if they would be able to do it. And their receivers making all kinds of plays, defense making plays.
Throwing it with their backup quarterback, by the way.
Yeah, it's really been a fun story to watch.
Yeah, I was going to make that point. Brendan Sullivan being the backup, not even knowing, necessarily that he's going to need to be the guy in these types of games. It is remarkable. And I think back to when I've talked to athletic directors, when they're evaluating a coach, an interim coach, or maybe there's a coach on the hot seat or a coordinator, and they tell you can tell when a team is fighting. They can tell when a team is playing hard for that coach. And this team has absolutely not quit on their season. And they've won more games than I think all of us thought that they were going to. I mean, you come in with a roster, yes, you have transfers, but you won 1 game last year. Yeah. So you come in with that, then you have everything that happened in the offseason, and it happened so close to the season. So it spills into the season, and it's so challenging. You have a head coach who's never been a head coach before.
Never coached in FBS
Never
before.
even coached in FBS. Yeah. Never, as a coordinator. And that's what's been so remarkable. I think they're going to have a chance to possibly go bowling. That's a remarkable statement because it just feels like a lot of these teams are very comparable, right? And anybody can beat anybody. But you just really can't overstate how impressive this has been from David Braun and the staff and the players to fight for the season.
It was interesting that window of 30 days of the transfer portal opens up, right? So when Pat Fitzgerald got let go, they all had 30 days to leave. There was one player who left the program. Now, there were some incoming freshmen who left, but in terms of guys who had been around the program who were not incoming freshmen, one player on the entire roster left. And I think that kind of gives you a sense of right away, hey, they clearly like this guy. Yeah. They clearly believe in this guy. But yeah, I think it's a remarkable story. And again, some of the players who are contributing aren't necessarily guys that you thought would. They have some obvious weaknesses that I think they've been able to play around, and again, it's been neat.
Let's look at it from this perspective, right? First-time head coach. We know how hard it is to do that when everything is just fine off the field and all you're doing is worrying about coaching. But you take a person who came in to fix the defense. That's what his role was. Come fix the defense. So I don't know how much he's really studied and planned to become a head coach. And weeks later, you're forced into that position, and it's not like you have a playbook for it, right? He needed to really reach out to people in his past to really get an understanding of the expectations. He doesn't even know how the university works. He didn't when he took over. So to think about all the things he's had to deal with to this point and still have the results that they're getting on the field, it is really amazing.
What do we make of Maryland? Maryland, we were sitting here a month ago and we were having the debate about, is Maryland the 4th best team in the Big Ten? Could they be the 3rd best team in the Big Ten? Could they beat one of these teams in the East that historically they have not had much success against? And the answer, unfortunately, has been a resounding no. And so now they've lost 3 straight, and that includes losses to Illinois and Northwestern. What do you make of this? I mean, unfortunately, this is the template that we've seen where they're really good in September and then it kind of falls apart after October 1st.
Yeah, I feel like we're going to, next year, when we talk ourselves into them in September, we're going to wait and see, because you have to sustain it throughout the rest of the season. And I think, too, we talked last week about letting a loss spiral into another loss. Well, now it's 2 more. Now you're in a 3-game losing streak, and things are just not working. The defense does not look anywhere near as consistent as it was early in the season. The offense looks very average at times. There's good and there's bad. It's really frustrating. I imagine really frustrating for Maryland fans to be watching this, just considering how well the team was playing a month ago and played for 2.5 quarters against Ohio State. Like, that's the part, like the top end of the team, you see it, but they're not playing anywhere near that. And, you know, I hate to say that Jerry DiNardo is right, but he has harped on
That's a broken clock.
I know, but I do have to give him credit on this, because he said, if you're Maryland and you're trying to take the next step is beating the teams that you're supposed to beat. Yeah. And they're not doing that this year.
Right, and it's and you look at the way the offense is going right now, Talia, there are a lot of high footballs coming out. He's overthrowing a lot of guys. Communication, they don't seem to be on the same page. And that's where they have to be. You talk about those explosive plays that they were able to generate early. They haven't been able to do that because there have been a lot of high footballs for whatever reason. He's under duress, not being able to really set his feet, and they're just having issues. And that's another one of those head scratchers. You just don't understand what's happening, what changed in the last 3 weeks that has gotten them to where they are right now.
I get Penn State this week, but I'm with you. I mentioned this on the final drive. I'll reiterate it here. They were going into that Ohio State game. They led the Big Ten in plays of 30 yards or longer. They've had 1 in the 3 games subsequent to that. So, yeah, they have lost their explosion. Nebraska is 1 win away from a bowl. We talked about David Braun, what a nice job he's done. Matt Rule has done a phenomenal job, particularly considering it didn't get off to a great start. And so you have the negativity swirling and the here we go again swirling. And, man, they have picked themselves up off the mat, and they've done it with an offense that, frankly, isn't clicking on all cylinders. But, man, their defense is good.
The defense is good, and we saw the seeds of that planted really early in the season, which I thought was really good. But they're making up for an offense that continues to turn the ball over.
Yes.
Typically, if you're turning the ball over like this, you're not winning games. But they respond to them well. They're still tough. They've dealt with injuries. They've responded to that. But also, just again, that defense really does keep them in every game. And I thought it was interesting after the game, Matt Rule, who, again, has done an incredible job this season, was asked, you know, being one win away from bowl eligibility, he said it's not just about 1 more. And he's still upset about some of the games they lost early in the season, because I actually do think, despite injuries and all that, if they had played some of these teams, Colorado comes to mind, that they would have been able to beat them if they played them the way they're playing now.
Yeah, it is. They're running the football, and that's what they have success doing that. But it is really about this defense and what they've been able to do on that side of the ball. Unless they're playing against a high-powered offense, that's the only time you really saw some issues with them. But when they know who they're playing against, those matchup teams, they're going to win those games just by the way they play, and they're able to do it by continuing to turn the football over. So what happens if they don't do that?
I know.
They get that corrected.
Be a little more comfortable, I think, to win.
I mean, tied for first place in the West. I realize more than half of the teams in the West are tied for first place in the West. So I understand it doesn't put them in exclusive company here, but still, I mean,
to be there.
Why not Nebraska?
It hasn't been there in a long time.
That's what I was going to say. These are things that we did not see during the Scott Frost era. Even in the years where the West was all over the map, they were not a factor. So for them to be a factor, to be in position to go bowling, I mean, it's remarkable.
Team that won the West last year, Purdue, so now they are 1 loss away from being eliminated from bowl contention. And, man, they just had no answers offensively. Again, we heap praise on Nebraska's defense, I think deservedly so. But it felt like Purdue was turning a corner after that Illinois game, and they turned a corner into a brick wall.
Yeah, they've been disappointing, and there's a couple teams, because again, a lot of teams have been up and down, but Purdue has been one of the bigger disappointments, even with a coaching change and obviously a lot of roster turnover. I think that's been surprising, because we thought that defensively that would kind of be there with a defensive-minded head coach. But they've just really struggled in a lot of different areas all season, and it hasn't really gotten better. You're not seeing that direct line of improvement.
Yeah, and Hudson's got when he's playing at his best, so goes his team, and they're able to also run the football to have some success. But they're struggling in that area, and they're turning the football over, which becomes a problem. They're not, as we talk about, these teams aren't good enough to really be able to overcome a lot of that a lot of the times, and they've got to get this thing figured out and continue to upgrade the roster and continue to really take the steps they need to on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and then, to your point, I mean, because they're turning the ball over and that's been a problem for them, but they need to capitalize on the turnovers, right? When we talk about Nebraska winning despite, you need to take advantage of those opportunities from your.
Yes, when a fumble recovery turns into a blocked field goal going the other way for 7 points.
That's not what you draw up.
No, that's problematic. One last game to talk about, Minnesota. Talk about another team that is in this hunt, tied for
We're all
first
in.
place.
We're all in the hunt. We're in the West. We're competing.
I mean, okay, so I just want to. Jordan Newman was their 6th leading rusher entering the game. There's 6. He had carried the ball 15 times in his entire career.
Whole career.
So, of course, he gets 40 carries, which is the most of any back in college football this year, and goes over 200 yards.
He was fresh.
He was indeed.
He was fresh. He was ready. It is remarkable how Minnesota, and this was true before this season. We kind of always felt like they could plug a running back in.
Yeah.
But this year, to put guys that barely had experience in, and then they have these monster games, it's incredible what they can do and what the scheme and the system allows them to do. And then these running backs ready for the moment.
Right.
Because it's not just coming in and being effective. I mean, they're putting in huge games.
Huge.
Yes.
That's the
He had the best game of any Big Ten running back this year. He's a walk-on, by the way.
Oh yeah, I gotta love it.
Yeah, I mean,
it defies. And this is an offensive line that's gotten better as well, because they weren't playing as well earlier in the year, and they continue to get better. But when they want to run the ball, was it 26 runs in the second half of that game to 4 passes? Man, just control the game.
That's the formula we thought that they were going to do all season, right? And they probably, in their best games, they've leaned on the run game. But, yeah, when you got just this stable of running backs that just seems endless and everyone can do it, we probably could have a decent.
Well, I mean, he could. Mr. A touchdowns
I can get
over
you 5 yards in about 15 carries.
There we go. No, 40.
Nope, that's true.
You'll get 40.
Carries.
Yeah, we'll see how many. Yeah. But you know what? They threw for 200 yards, too. I mean, to their credit, you want to talk balance, they threw for 200 and they ran for 200.
Yeah.
I would say.
Exactly. Right.
Yes. So I'd say it's pretty good balance. Michigan State, look, a tough spot here. We've discussed ongoing how difficult the spot Harlan Barnett is in. It doesn't seem to be getting better. I think the weird thing is, like, they made the change at quarterback because it felt like Hauser maybe gave them a better chance, and now he hasn't played that well. They made another change at quarterback, and Levitt came in, and now it's like, well, should he be the quarterback? And I don't know. It's not a great spot, they continue to struggle in pass defense. Run defense had been pretty good coming into this game, and it wasn't.
I was going to say, when we talk about the balance for Minnesota, that's great for Minnesota, but this hasn't been an explosive or even that reliable of a passing game. So for Michigan State to allow them to throw the ball like that, I think is concerning. And in general, this is a challenging season. You got to get to the end of it. I felt like after they watched that Rutgers game slip through their fingers that this was possible, that they would just kind of be overmatched and kind of put out in some of these games. But the quarterback thing has been a problem. There's just no spark. There's nothing that is, kind of going to give them momentum heading into the stretch run.
And it's always difficult to try to put games together. And that's where they have to be able to do it. Find a way to at least be efficient. Right now, they're not. Offensively, that's a team that'll turn the ball over as well, and that doesn't give them a chance. And if the defense doesn't set them up, it's just a tough situation for Barnett and those players to be in right now.
It's pretty remarkable. 7 straight conference losses. That is the longest conference losing streak in the history of Michigan State football, which actually says a lot about how good Michigan State football is. Because 7 isn't that many, right? But still, it's been tough, and again, doesn't get easier. You got Ohio State coming up in a couple weeks. Got Nebraska who's playing well, so not a great spot. All right, let's go big picture. AP rankings out yesterday. Same top 5: Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, and Washington. Oregon up a spot after absolutely pounding Utah. Penn State moves up to number 9. UCLA and USC are 20th and 24th respectively. So all 4 future Big Ten teams are still ranked. Nicole, though, that poll takes a back seat to the playoff rankings starting tomorrow. We'll all look with interest at what happens on Sunday, and then we'll dismiss it once it comes out on Tuesday, because it's the playoff rankings, obviously, that matter and that determine who makes it into the Final Four. So kind of big picture, and I think I kind of hinted at this earlier, but I'm interested in both of your thoughts. It feels like, while we have a good sense, given the number 5 power conference unbeaten, so I think we have a sense of what that top 5 is going to look like in terms of the teams that are going to be in it, it still feels like this is pretty wide open.
Yeah, the order of those top 5 is going to be the big question. Like, the biggest question that I have coming into these first rankings are actually the helpful ones. These are the ones where we get a sense of what this year's committee values. It's going to be where Georgia is. And Michigan is kind of a subset of that. But I think it's Georgia specifically because they have not played, if we look at the AP rankings, they've not beaten a top 25 team.
Right.
They have not looked great all the time. They have 2 great wins where they looked complete and they looked dominant.
Including the most recent one.
Including their most recent one, yes. It looks like they're kind of rounding into form, but they nearly lost to Auburn. They've got these questions, right, about how dominant they are. Their schedule gets more challenging down the stretch. I could see the committee saying, you know, you're not going to be 1 just because you're 1 in the AP poll. We're going to lean into resume, and therefore Georgia would get dinged for that. And you could even see them outside of the top 4, and the committee could just justify that by saying, we'll move them when they beat teams, right? They've got these top 20 opportunities down the stretch. A little bit similar with Michigan, right? They also haven't played anybody that has really, really challenged them. I do think the committee likes balanced teams. They're going to see all of the efficiency, offensive, defensive efficiency. I think they'll be treated a little bit differently. But then you've got to see, you know, where they are stacked up against all these other unbeatens.
Yeah. It is going to be interesting to see where they are, because I think ultimately you talk about this Georgia team, and is it because of the body of work, what they've already done? Will that allow them to stay in that number 1 position? I kind of get a feeling that maybe it will, but I think when you look at what Ohio State has done and the way Michigan has played this year, I think will be telling to where they have them stacked up.
Right. I think that's the interesting difference between Georgia and Michigan, although, again, as we said, Georgia has had a few games where they have absolutely looked the part, and they did it without Brock Bowers this weekend and for the foreseeable future without Brock Bowers. But the difference is that Michigan's annihilating people, right? Whereas Georgia is not. Michigan, far and away, largest average margin of victory in the country. So, look, this is hard because, as you say, you don't really know how a committee thinks until you see their first rankings, right? And then you get a sense, okay, what does this committee value? That being said, just kind of interested, and we won't hold you to this, but kind of what do you think it should look like if you were on the committee, and what do you think that they'll do?
Okay, so I think they're 2 different things.
Yes.
Because I think that the top 6 that you're seeing on the left, those are my personal top 6. This is how I would rank these teams. And if I thought they were going to play each other, like these are the teams that I would give an edge to. But I'm trusting in Michigan and Georgia, despite the resume not being there. What I think the committee might do is make a point about resume. So you could go with Ohio State and say, right now, these are 2 top 12 wins in the AP. We don't know what they're going to be ranked in the CFP. Florida State really good win over LSU. That Clemson one, no, so much.
Not as impressive as it seemed.
It did seem more impressive at the time. But then, again, I would say you still include these teams that look dominant, look the part, seem to be 4 of the best, among the 4 best teams in the country. Washington and Oregon. Now, Washington could also be in that top 4. They're unbeaten. They've looked bad the last 2 weeks. They looked really shaky. The offense didn't show up 2 weeks ago. The question that is going to be really interesting for Oregon is, are they the top 1 loss team? And I think they should be, because I also think that they might be the best team in the Pac-12. If they play out that season, avenge their only loss, they'll be in. But I think for now, you stick with that head-to-head, so you have Washington above them. And those should be the 6. Those should be the 6 teams in my mind, and then the Big 12 teams below them. But, Howard, I really think the committee might try to make the resume point. And that's why you could see Ohio State at 1.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would think. I would think that Ohio State would be 1 just because of what they've been able to do. If you look at being able to go on the road and be able to take care of business, they just have done, to me, an outstanding job. I like where Michigan is. I would say Michigan would be number 2 for some of those reasons. Then you look at, Florida State, you look at Georgia. I'm dinging Georgia, but I don't know that the committee will ultimately do it. I kind of feel like they may just
Put them at one?
continue to have them at one. But I think they're probably, to me, the third best team. I really like Washington and Oregon. Those two teams, they are fun to watch. Washington, not so much the last couple of weeks, but when you think about the way they play the game, they could give anyone a lot of trouble. In Florida State, man, they have really turned the corner and become that national power that they once were.
The Florida State question is an interesting one because I think we all think they'll be in those top four. I think they have the clearest path now. They've played their challenging games. They've won them. They are starting to kind of find that next gear. Jordan Travis staying healthy. But if they win out, they'll for sure be in the playoff. Like, it's very clear. They've got a couple challenging games left, but their question is just going to be about seeding. The question of how the committee treats Ohio State and Georgia, I think, are the two biggest questions coming into Tuesday.
Right. And so you basically made the argument for eye test. You basically said,
Myself.
hey, I'm looking at this and I'm saying these are the best teams. There's no rhyme or reason historically, right, to what the committee does. I feel like we've had probably they're more resume based. I think they try to justify a little bit more with resume.
The very first rankings, I think they tried to make that point. Remember,
Yes.
Florida State was unbeaten, but they were third. So that's where, like, the first one, they could make a point if they want to.
Right. It's been interesting, though. I mean, 4 of the 9 years we've had this, it hasn't been the team that's the AP number 1. Now, the flip side is 5 of the 9 it has been. So, I'm not sure what you learned from that.
Yeah.
But there's certainly plenty of precedent for them to go in a direction other than Georgia. There's also plenty of precedent for them to go in the direction of Georgia. So
we'll be watching.
We'll find out tomorrow. Yes, we'll be at the edge of our seats.